Hi gang, what's your favourite faction in 40k? Well, whatever they are, they're bad. As we all know, there are no good guys in 40k, Games Workshop say so all the time. Everyone's bad, Chaos is bad, the Imperium is bad, Space Bugs are bad, everyone is bad. So in this video, I'm going to go through them all and explain why your favourite faction are terrible people. There are no goodies in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. None. That's the official line, and there are hundreds of books to prove it, full of mindless slaughter, pointless wars, and awful decisions. Every single faction in 40k is bad. But occasionally, online, some people try to question this. It's a dangerous universe after all. Maybe this faction's decisions are justifiable because of survival or heroism or something. My faction, yeah, they're fine. They're the true good guys of the setting. And those bad things they did, well, those were just hard decisions that just had to be made. And I get it. People want simplified stories with clear heroes and villains. But that's not how life works, and as a work of satire, that's not how 40k works either. 40k is a war game, and despite the many simplified action movies out there, wars are never as simple as a single righteous cause. Goodies versus baddies. Despite how much some people might fetishize them, or the idea of being in them, wars are bad. And if you want a war game where every single faction can fight every single other faction forever, including fighting amongst themselves, then every single faction has to be bad too. So let's go through all of them and find out exactly how bad they are, starting with the most obvious one. The Imperium of Man is bad. I mean, this is the obvious one, isn't it? The Imperium are designed to be absolutely terrible. As Games Workshop themselves say, its numberless legions of soldiers and zealots bludgeon their way across the galaxy, delivering death to anyone and anything that doesn't adhere to their blinkered view of purity. Almost every man and woman toils in misery either on the battlefield, where survival is measured in hours, or in the countless manufactorums and hive slums that fuel the Imperial war machine. All of this in slavish servitude to the living corpse of a god emperor whose commandments are at best only half remembered, twisted by time and the fallibility of humanity. The Imperium of Man stands as a cautionary tale of what could happen should the very worst of humanity's lust for power and extreme unyielding xenophobia set in. The Imperium is, if you've forgotten, a totalitarian, oppressive, backwards, conservative, religious fundamentalist dystopia, rife with division, intolerance, inequality, and outright slavery that cares almost nothing for any form of what we would call human rights. The planets that make it up are wildly different from medieval feudal societies, which are bad, to nightmare cyberpunk megacities, also bad. On one hand, as long as its constituent planets toe the line in terms of their ties to the Imperium, they can do whatever they want. But in practice, this means that the Imperium as a whole legitimizes any form of rule as long as it keeps the status quo. Hereditary monarchies and class systems, absolutely fine. Ruthless dictatorships, totally okay. Indentured servitude and literal slavery, yeah, no problem. Sexism, homophobia, racism, do what you want on your planet, the Imperium does not care. But if you try and revolt and improve things, well, the Imperium cares then, and you can expect to be bombed into oblivion for the crime of being disruptive. Of course, the Imperium does all this in the name of survival. That's what its defenders say. And yeah, sometimes the wars fought by its many armies are wars of self-defense. But even that comes with caveats. The guy who formed the Imperium, the Emperor, believes pretty strongly in the manifest destiny of humanity, also something we know is bad. The Imperium therefore believes that any form of intelligent life other than humanity needs to be completely wiped out just in case, regardless of if they're actually a threat, which can lead to strange definitions for wars of survival. Of course, the other main threat to humanity is chaos, which the Imperium solves by creating conditions so oppressive that underground cults promising a better life find it really easy to gain traction. A huge proportion of the chaos threat in 40k comes from formerly Imperial armies who were treated so horribly they went looking for something else. And while the Imperium is under threat from those things, this survival rhetoric ignores the fact that a huge proportion of wars fought by humanity are wars of honor, also a concept that's bad. Imperial forces are likely to go to war because it impugns their honor not to, or because the actions of a foe can be construed as an insult to someone in the Imperium, or for a variety of religious reasons. Whole wasteful crusades have been fought to reclaim worlds of almost zero value because of a rumor of a lost religious relic, or the dishonor of an overrun shrine. The Imperium is also horrifically corrupt at every level, which means that whole wars can be started because of intra-governmental politicking and one-upmanship. It's also obsessed with genetic purity, no red flags there, partially because of that Emperor guy, but also because of the threat of chaos that is then played up to ludicrous levels. Though officially, the Imperium isn't actually racist within humanity. If you happen to display any physical traits that seem out of the norm to the local population, you can expect a swift burning at a stake soon afterwards. The Imperium is bad. In its nominal fight to save humanity, it frequently causes just way more suffering and hardship than it actually needs to, and its own sense of righteousness stops it from ever accepting that there might be a better way. And it's so focused on the idea of humanity as a whole, it rarely actually gives much of a shit about individual humans. But we can't just stop there, because all of its armies are bad too, in their own special way. The Space Marines are ruthless, unfeeling, hypno-indoctrinated super soldiers who are bad. They replicate by abducting small children, cutting them open and filling them with gene seeds, brainwashing them, and then consigning them to an eternity of constant war. The populations who supply those children frequently have no choice in this. Depending on the chapter, they might see regular humans as little more than collateral damage or a source of handy slaves. Even the nicer ones are horrific mass murderers willing to inflict huge losses on their own side in the name of honor. The Astra Militarum is the ultimate uncaring military system. They're also bad. It conscripts soldiers by law into a never-ending tour of duty and then throws them into hopeless situations millions at a time, often because human life is considered cheaper to expend than material resources are. This is enabled by a literal cult of sacrifice. That's bad, everyone. All of which results in an average soldier's life expectancy being around 15 hours. On the other hand, its upper echelons are riddled by classism. Being from the right family will absolutely get you a safe position of command behind the lines, regardless of how many people die from your stupid decisions. And if for any reason this system might, not work that well, they just have a whole rank of people whose job is to shoot whoever made a mistake. The Adeptus Ministorum and its pet army, the Sisters of Battle, are also bad. A ridiculously over-the-top, oppressive theocracy. They insist on total control over the religious beliefs of every human and will happily burn anyone who disagrees as a heretic, despite the fact that their God Emperor spent his entire life telling them not to. That doesn't matter to them because they're also hopelessly corrupt. The higher echelons of the church are willing to use their position and the millennia of established church law to live in unimaginable luxury and get away with practically anything they want by whipping up their supporters into a war of faith. In fact, they're such a liability that the rest of the Imperium has to repeatedly try and curb their power. The reflection of them is the Sisters of Battle, an army of, again, radicalized orphans with no option but to serve the church until death. They are true believers, the irony there being that their own colossal self-righteousness actually creates a psychic effect that they then dub miracles from the God Emperor while burning anyone else who exhibits similar psychic abilities. Quite apart from the use of religion as a tool of control, the entire organization are murderous hypocrites. The Adeptus Mechanicus are bad, a ludicrous organization to put in charge of scientific advancement, since they're also a bunch of religious fundamentalists who, at least nominally, believe progress to be heretical. They are slightly more meritocratic than the rest of the Imperium, but all that means is that your average tech priest is a raging egotist and megalomaniac who feels justified in cybernetically enslaving anyone less powerful than them. Now, there is an argument that the reason you put such a conservative organization in charge of technological progress is because, well, science gone wrong has been a problem for humanity in the past, but unfortunately, just like the other religious organization here, tech priests are massive hypocrites and will frequently bend every possible rule and create the most dangerous experimental technology possible if they reckon they can get away with it. The Adeptus Arbites are, of course, bastards, a law enforcement agency who will happily throw the death penalty at anyone for anything. They're the epitome of state control of violence. They're also a reference to Judge Dredd, who, let's not forget, is meant to be bad. And if that wasn't enough, the Imperium has an actual Inquisition, a space navy that happily press gang millions of innocent people and then work them to death below decks, all while their upper classes host lavish dinners at the captain's table, and the Imperial Knights, an entire strata of feudal aristocrats who rule over a peasant class and control their walking mech suits through special chairs that actually turn them into even bigger dicks. All of this is also bad. It's a bit questionable how bad the Imperium would still be if the Emperor had survived, because his regime was pretty terrible, but the Imperium is definitely, absolutely bad. But don't worry, as Games Workshop said, there are no good guys in 40k, so everyone else is bad too. The Leagues of Votann are bad. They're also a really good foil to the Imperium, because rather than ancient notions of manifest destiny, bigoted conservatism and xenophobia, the Leagues of Votann are humans, sort of, who get to be bad in a whole new way. They're space capitalists. The Leagues want resources. Your resources, and they don't care how many planets, ecosystems, and environments they have to destroy to get them. Is your planet a verdant paradise packed with mineral wealth? Well, better get ready to be high-lased, because if you happen to be in the way, then you might just get blown up at the same time. Anything to get those gems, literally anything. In a similar vein, the ancient Eldari are also bad. There are many different sorts of space elf, and they're all bad in their own special ways, but one of their common traits is being a bunch of arrogant racists who genuinely believe that the Eldar are just fundamentally superior to everyone else. Craftworld Eldar, the good ones, view every other species of the galaxy as little more than barely evolved animals and will happily sacrifice billions of humans on the off chance that not doing so might lead to the death of a single Eldar. And they're pals with the Exodites, who will happily murder anyone for stepping on their lawn. And then we have the Drakari. The inhabitants of the dark city of Camorra treat everyone else in the galaxy like fuel, and have developed a whole culture based around causing as much pain as possible to keep themselves safe from Slaanesh. Now, you could argue that this is another necessity for their survival, but of course it isn't. The Drakari just enjoy it. Slave raiding for more torture fuel is a major part of their culture. Watching people get murdered in gladiatorial arenas is their main source of entertainment, and they do all this because living on a craft world or an Exodite maiden world just sounded boring. Eldar are relatively free to move between all their different cultures. The Drakari stay in theirs out of choice. And then outside those main Eldar factions, you have a death cult and a bunch of murder clowns whose main job is to try and make sure all the different Eldari factions have each other's back against, the inferior, lesser species they keep murdering. Then we have the Necrons, who are obviously bad. The Necrons are a species who launched an entire war because they were jealous of the Eldar's dads, and in order to win it, they gave a bunch of space vampires even more power, which obviously had no bad effects. They, just like everyone, can't share. They claim rightful ownership over the entire galaxy, and mostly consider anyone else living in it a sort of infestation to be exterminated. Their society is split into another series of hereditary class-based monarchies, except since they turned themselves into robots, all the lower levels of society are, yeah, you guessed it, mindless robot slaves. And then there's the Tau, who might look like the nicest on the surface, but no, they're bad. The Tau Empire dreams of uniting all the disparate species of the galaxy under the doctrine of the greater good, and their watercast envoys send out diplomatic missions to convince nearby planets to peacefully join them. And if they seem reticent, that's fine. They'll just use economic manipulation or outright war to achieve the same results. The Tau Empire must expand after all. Once you're in the Empire, you get all the benefits of advanced Tau society as long as you're willing to live as definite second-class citizens. Oh, and if anything goes wrong, the Tau commanders might just execute all the weird aliens just to be safe. And no one's really sure if this is all based on ethereal mind control or not, but yeah, join the Tau Empire, fight for the greater good, and don't get ideas above your station. Now, orcs are an interesting one, created originally as a tool of war and who treat fighting as a fun form of entertainment. There's an argument that orcs aren't actually morally that bad. They just really, really like fighting, and they can't change that. Their wars are fought out of biological imperative, and they frequently cause just as much damage to themselves as everyone else. And yeah, that sort of tracks until you see what happens after orcs win their wars. Because orcs, like apparently everyone else in the setting, are slavers. Captured humans can look forward to horrible treatment, being worked to death, and being the subject of casual cruelty just because the orcs think it's funny. Stuff that implies a definite choice to be a dick. Yeah, orcs are still bad. But finally, for the alien sector of the galaxy, we get the Tyranids, a huge alien bug swarm. The Tyranids probably have the best claim of all the Xenos of 40k to being not actually bad. They're kind of depicted like a swarm of locusts, inevitably drawn to populated areas of the galaxy to consume, with no more moral choice over that than any other animal might have. Unlike the orcs, they aren't deliberately cruel, they don't torture captives, and it's implied there's no real other way for them to exist. And to a degree, that also rings true for gene-stealer cults, who are people who have been, to various extents, psychically and biologically manipulated by a Tyranid parasite until they aren't really acting from a position of free will anymore. So while they're obviously designed in every way to mimic horror movie monsters, it's hard to make a case for the Tyranids actually being like morally bad rather than just, dangerous. But then we don't actually know how clever the hive mind that's in control of them is. It's certainly able to adapt in ways that suggest it's way more intelligent than just an animal, which might suggest the ability to make moral decisions. So I'm going to go with maybe bad. Anyway, then, finally, after all the slavery, manifest destiny, slavery, resource consumption, slavery, torture porn, and slavery, we get to the actual villains of 40k, Chaos. And guess what? Chaos is bad. So Chaos is a difficult one at first glance. The four great powers of Chaos, Khorne, Slaanesh, Nurgle and Tzeentch, are a bit like the Tyranids in that they aren't really capable of free will. Khorne isn't a person who chooses to be really bloodthirsty. Khorne is the emotion of anger, a great metaphysical cloud composed only of anger energy and whose desire is to only make more of itself. It doesn't understand what good and bad are, so calling Khorne evil would be like calling a really dangerous hurricane evil. It can't really act any other way. Khorne is always going to create as much anger as possible, Tzeentch as much scheming and betrayal as possible, Nurgle as much plague and disease as possible, and Slaanesh as much decadence as possible, and none of them are capable of understanding moderation. The lesson of Chaos is that anything in excess is very, very dangerous, but they can't really act in any other way. And it's arguable that this applies to demons too, who are minor reflections of their master, so they're also incapable of acting any other way. But Chaos does not get a free pass, because not only are they bad for everyone else, but also because the real threat of Chaos tends to come from those who serve it, and those people are bad. Pretty much all the armies of Chaos in the real world are composed of humans or other alien species who decided that serving Chaos might give them power. And since Chaos tends towards the excessive, gaining that power requires doing really bad stuff. Some Chaos followers are just overtly power-hungry monsters, sacrificing entire worlds for the promise of immortality or material gain. Some Chaos followers treat it like a religion, sacrificing millions for the glory of their gods, again, a choice in this world. And some Chaos followers are just really, really bitter people who only care about revenge, a motivation that is generally considered bad. Even the demonic legions, who, to be fair, don't really get a choice, tend to be led by demon princes, who were once mortal chaos worshippers who fell into one of the other three brackets. So, yeah, bad. Chaos might promise freedom from the oppressive Imperium and limitless power, but to get it, you have to be pretty bad. So there, everyone in 40k is bad. Whoever you pick, they're terrible people making awful decisions, like, say, wars. It's the perfect justification for a war game, and weirdly less problematic than a million other games and IPs that glorify war by insisting one side is fighting for some sort of oversimplified righteous cause. The fact that every faction has layer upon layer of infighting, leading to cynical politics, terrible decisions, and countless deaths is surprisingly realistic, because that's how most real-world wars work. In fact, it's what many sci-fi franchises have had to adopt over the years when they get to a certain level of complexity, because the idea of a completely righteous cause never really holds up. Generally, even the overt good guys have to adopt some shades of grey to make them believable. This world also forces the writers to come up with ways of making characters that are actually relatable within this, otherwise selling Black Library books would be really hard. The heroes of these stories tend to be flawed individuals, trying to do their best to protect their friends and comrades while trapped within a terrible system, or even people indoctrinated into the terrible system who have to make hard choices about when to toe the line and when to do the right thing, which is, of course, all very relatable. The fact that every faction in 40k is terrible in their own unique way, that no cause is completely righteous and just, is what makes 40k so popular, because it's just an exaggerated version of the real world. Anyway, that's it. You've been a bad viewer. Thanks for watching. And if you'd really like to listen to more about how incredibly terrible everyone is, there's probably a video popping up there on the right. And if you'd like to support the channel so I can tell you you're bad again, there's a link to the Patreon in the thing below. See ya!